Hi, my name is Karen. I'm 54 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that if you worked hard, paid your bills, and treated people with kindness, life would repay you with stability. Maybe not wealth, maybe not luxury, but at least peace. That belief carried me through 3 decades of teaching elementary school. I stood in front of chalkboards and smartboards, read Charlotte's Web out loud more times than I can count, tied shoelaces for kids who didn't know how, and stayed late grading papers until my eyes blurred. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. Every paycheck, no matter how modest, went into 2 things: raising my son and daughter and paying off the little house I bought on the edge of town. That house became my anchor. A 1-story brick home with a creaky porch swing, a stubborn oak tree in the front yard, and wallpaper I never got around to replacing. Some people see just walls and shingles. I saw 2 decades of sacrifice. I saw nights when I skipped dinners out so I could send in the mortgage check on time. Summers when I tutored kids just to cover the property taxes. The house wasn't big, but it was mine, and I thought my family respected that. I was wrong. When I turned 50, my health started slipping. Nothing dramatic at first. A little shortness of breath, a little fatigue. Doctors said it was stress. But then came the chest pains. Real ones. The kind that feel like someone is pressing a stone into your ribs. By the time they figured out my heart needed surgery, I was terrified. Still, I told myself, you'll get through this. You'll rest. And you'll go back to your quiet life in that little house you worked so hard for. The surgery was harder than I imagined. Tubes, monitors, lights that made the hospital room feel like a spotlight on my weakness. I woke up with my throat raw, my chest burning, and the sharp awareness that I was suddenly very small in a very big world. I expected to see flowers, or maybe hear my son's voice, or feel my daughter holding my hand. But what I saw instead was my brother. He sat there in the chair by the window, not looking at me, but at a folder in his lap, a folder too polished for a hospital room. When I blinked and tried to speak, he smiled, thin, rehearsed. He leaned closer and said, "It's just paperwork, Karen. Nothing complicated. Just sign here so I can take care of things while you recover." I tried to focus. My head was foggy, but I knew those papers weren't small. They carried weight. I forced my eyes down and caught familiar words: deed, transfer, authorization, and then my address, my house, the home I'd given my life to. My breath caught. The machines beeped faster. I shook my head slowly, painfully. His smile faded, replaced by something colder. "Don't be stubborn," he muttered. "You can't handle this place anymore. Let someone who knows business handle it." In that moment, the room didn't just feel sterile. It felt predatory, like I was prey and my own blood had circled for years, waiting for me to be too weak to fight back. I turned my head away. I whispered, maybe only in my mind, "No." He sighed, snapped the folder shut, and stood up. No comfort, no reassurance, not even a pat on the hand, just frustration, like I was an obstacle instead of a sister. Then he walked out, leaving the papers on the table by the bed. That's when reality settled in. For 54 years, I believed family meant safety, that even when the world was cruel, your relatives would shield you. But lying there, chest stitched and heart aching, I realized something brutal. Sometimes the people closest to you are the very ones sharpening the knives. I wasn't just recovering from surgery. I was waking up to betrayal. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds, cutting sharp lines across the white hospital sheets. My chest ached with every breath, but it wasn't just the surgery. It was the weight of what I had seen in my brother's hands the night before. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, that maybe the medications were playing tricks on me. Maybe it was just a stack of hospital forms, and I'd mistaken the words in my haze. Families fight, sure. Siblings disagree, but siblings don't circle like vultures when you can barely sit up. Do they? I pressed the call button for the nurse, and when she came in, I croaked out one word: folder. She handed it to me gently, probably assuming it was some medical release I needed to sign. My fingers trembled as I flipped it open. No, I hadn't imagined it. Right there, in bold black letters: quitclaim deed. My property listed, my address spelled out. Below it, a transfer line that ended with my brother's name, his signature already scrawled at the bottom. The only blank space was where mine should go. I dropped the pen they'd tucked in the folder like it burned my hand. My pulse spiked, the monitor beside me beeping frantically. The nurse rushed over, worried about my heart. But my heart wasn't the problem. The betrayal was. My brother had waited for this moment, waited until I was stitched, groggy, tethered to machines. He hadn't brought flowers. He hadn't asked if I was scared. He had brought paperwork. And behind the smooth voice, behind the "it's just a formality," was the truth. He wanted the house I bled for, the house that held the story of my life. I told myself maybe he thought he was helping. Maybe he convinced himself I couldn't handle the taxes, the upkeep, the stress. But deep down, I knew better. I'd seen the way he looked at that property during family gatherings, the way he'd grumble about me wasting it when I could sell and enjoy retirement. His definition of enjoyment was a new truck and golf club memberships. Mine was planting roses by the porch. Now I understood. He wasn't offering help. He was taking advantage. When he came back later that day, I pretended to be asleep. I heard his shoes squeak on the tile floor, heard the shuffle of papers as he tried to slide them closer to my hand. My throat went dry. I wanted to scream, but my voice still cracked from the tube they'd pulled out after surgery. I couldn't fight, not with words. So I did the only thing I could. I kept still. I refused. He muttered under his breath, something about me being stubborn, about how I'd regret it. Then he stormed out, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the IV pole. I lay there staring at the ceiling, hot tears sliding down into my hairline. My chest rose and fell too quickly. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was fury. But fury feels useless when you're too weak to sit up without help. The doctors came in later, checked my incision, adjusted my medication. They smiled politely, told me to focus on healing. None of them knew that the wound inside me was far deeper than the one stitched across my chest. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the hallway outside made me tense. Every shadow across the curtain made me think he was back, papers in hand, waiting for a moment when no one else was watching. I hugged the thin blanket to my chest like armor. And for the first time in my life, I was afraid of my own family. When my daughter visited the next morning, she brought a cup of coffee from the diner down the street. The smell alone made my throat ache with longing. She smiled, tired from her night shift, and asked how I was feeling. I wanted to tell her everything, to blurt out that her uncle was trying to steal the house, that he'd cornered me in the weakest moment of my life. But the words stuck. Because how do you tell your child that the family they've trusted their whole life is plotting against their mother? How do you shatter the illusion of safety? So I just smiled weakly and sipped the coffee. She left a little while later, rushing to work, kissing my forehead before she slipped out the door. And I stayed behind, alone with my thoughts, with the folder shoved in the drawer beside the bed. By the third day, the fear had hardened into something else: resolve. If my brother thought I'd crumble quietly, he didn't know me at all. I had survived single motherhood, student loans, years of balancing bills on a teacher's salary. I had survived heartbreak, loneliness, and now open heart surgery. I wasn't going to let a signature steal what decades of sacrifice had built. Still, I knew one thing clearly. I couldn't do this alone. My strength was inside me, yes, but my body was frail. If he tried again, if he pushed harder, I might not be able to resist. That thought sat heavy in my chest as I closed my eyes. For the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, I whispered a prayer. Not for healing, not for less pain, but for someone, anyone, to stand beside me when he came back with those papers. And deep down, I knew he would come back. Because greed doesn't stop after the first attempt. I don't know if you believe in timing or in small miracles, but I do, because just when I thought I couldn't carry another ounce of fear alone, she walked in. Her name was Sarah, my oldest friend. We met decades ago in the teacher's lounge, back when we were both 20-somethings with too much energy and not enough sleep. She used to bring donuts on Mondays just to see people smile. Over the years, we stayed close, through marriages, divorces, birthdays, and funerals. She was the one person who never disappeared, no matter how messy life got. And that morning, she appeared in my hospital doorway holding a paper bag from the bakery down the street. She wrinkled her nose at the smell of antiseptic. "I figured you'd need something that doesn't taste like cardboard," she said, setting the bag on the table. I tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. Sarah caught it immediately. She always did. "What's wrong, Karen?" she asked softly, pulling a chair close. For a moment, I hesitated. I hadn't even told my daughter. How could I burden Sarah with something so heavy? But then I thought about that folder, about my brother's cold eyes, about how alone I'd felt when he walked out. The words broke free before I could stop them. "They're trying to take my house," I whispered. Sarah blinked. "What?" "My brother. He brought papers, transfer papers. He wants me to sign everything over. He waited until I could barely sit up, until I couldn't even argue." My voice cracked. "He knows how much that house means to me, and he's trying to steal it." Silence filled the room for a beat. Then Sarah's jaw tightened, her hands curling into fists on her lap. "That's low," she said finally. "That's worse than low. That's predatory." The word fit too perfectly. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "I don't know what to do. I can't fight him from here. And he's so smooth, Sarah. He'll tell everyone he's just helping, that I'm confused, that I'm sick." Sarah leaned forward, her voice steady. "Then we'll make sure no one believes his lies. We'll get proof. We'll protect you." I blinked. "We?" She gave me a look, half stern, half tender. "Did you think I was going to sit here and eat croissants while you got railroaded? Not a chance." Something loosened in my chest. For the first time in days, I didn't feel completely cornered. Sarah opened the drawer beside the bed and pulled out the folder. She flipped through the pages quickly, her eyes narrowing. "Karen, this isn't even subtle. His name's already filled in. All he needs is your signature. And look at this clause. Retroactive authority? He's trying to give himself permission to act like he already owns the place." Her voice grew sharper with each sentence. "This isn't help. This is theft." I swallowed hard. I knew it. I needed someone else to say it. She set the folder down firmly. "Then we'll start here. First, you don't sign anything, ever. Not for him, not for anyone, unless I or someone you trust is right here. Second, I know a lawyer, not one of those billboard guys, but someone who actually helped me when I fought over Mom's estate. She's tough, quiet but tough. I'll call her today." I stared at Sarah, stunned. In the span of 10 minutes, she'd built a plan. Where I saw only fog and fear, she carved a path. The relief was overwhelming. My eyes filled again, but this time with gratitude. "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," she said simply. "This is what friends are for." Blood doesn't always mean loyalty. Sometimes family is who shows up when you need them most. Her words wrapped around me like a blanket. Later that afternoon, when the nurse came in to check my vitals, Sarah was still there, scribbling notes on a napkin like some makeshift investigator. She asked the nurse questions too, about visitor logs, about how often people could come in and out. The nurse raised an eyebrow but answered politely. Sarah wasn't just helping. She was protecting. That night, after she left, I lay in bed, replaying everything. The betrayal was still raw, yes, but now there was also something else. A flicker of strength I thought I'd lost. Because betrayal hurts less when someone stands beside you to say, I see it too. You're not crazy. You're not alone. I closed my eyes, breathing easier for the first time since surgery. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. My brother would be back. He'd push harder. But now he wasn't just facing me, weak and stitched together. He was facing me and Sarah. And that, I thought, might just be enough to change everything. 2 days later, Sarah returned to my hospital room with a look that told me she hadn't just brought flowers. She carried a leather tote, the kind she always used when she meant business. Behind her was a woman I hadn't seen before. Tall, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, hair pulled into a neat bun. Karen, Sarah said, pulling a chair closer. This is Elaine. She's the lawyer I told you about. Trust me, you'll want her on your side. Elaine gave me a firm nod, not warm, but steady. The kind of presence that made you feel like the ground under your feet just got stronger. She set a thin folder on the tray table beside my bed. I've reviewed the documents Sarah showed me, she said. Your brother isn't being clever. He's being sloppy. I almost laughed at the word. Nothing about the fear I'd been drowning in felt sloppy. It felt calculated, deliberate. But Elaine explained, tapping the papers with a pen. First, the deed. He prepared it himself. No notary seal, no witness signature. That alone makes it worthless. Second, this clause here. Retroactive authority? Judges hate that. It screams manipulation. And third, she flipped a page. The date. He listed it as effective the morning of your surgery when you were under anesthesia. If this ever saw a courtroom, it would crumble. Her voice was calm, almost detached, but every word made my pulse slow. For the first time since this nightmare began, someone wasn't just sympathizing. Someone was dismantling it piece by piece. But, Elaine continued, that doesn't mean he won't try again. He could forge. He could pressure. He could file something without your knowledge. What we need is evidence, proof that he's acting in bad faith. That way, if he pushes harder, we'll be ready to stop him before he gains traction. I swallowed. How do we do that? She leaned back. We start simple. Visitor logs, phone records, financial movements. If he's circling your property, there will be a trail. Sarah grinned like she'd been waiting for this. She pulled out her phone. Already started. I called the county clerk's office yesterday. Guess what? 2 weeks before your surgery, your brother requested a copy of your property title. And last week he asked about zoning permits for redevelopment. The room tilted slightly as her words sank in. Redevelopment? Elaine's eyes narrowed. He's not after your house just to keep it in the family. He wants to flip it, sell it to developers. Probably already has a buyer lined up. My stomach twisted. My little brick home, my porch swing, my oak tree, bulldozed into dust for condos or a strip mall. Sarah reached over, squeezing my hand. Not gonna happen. Not while we're here, Elaine closed the folder. Karen, the good news is you don't need to fight him right now. Focus on recovery. Let us gather. The stronger our file, the less chance he has of touching that property. That night, after they left, I stared at the ceiling again. But it wasn't the same as before. The fear was still there. But now it had an outline, a shape I could see, and shapes can be fought. The next week blurred with checkups, pills, and long naps, but Sarah never slowed. She came every afternoon, sometimes with pastries, sometimes with updates. One day, she showed me bank statements she'd managed to get through a friend at the credit union. Look here, she said, pointing at a line of withdrawals. Your brother pulled out $10,000 in cash last month. right after he asked the clerk for your title. Coincidence? I don't think so. Another day, Elaine walked in with her laptop. She pulled up property filings from the county. Preliminary application for demolition, she read aloud, filed under a holding company registered to your brother's address. He was planning to tear your house down before you even went in for surgery. I pressed my fist against my chest, not from the stitches this time, but from the ache in my heart. He hadn't just wanted my house. He wanted to erase it, erase me. Elaine closed the laptop and looked at me directly. Karen, this is bigger than family drama. This is fraud. We're not just going to block him. We're going to make sure the law sees exactly what he's doing. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Then I whispered, "Thank you." Sarah grinned. "Don't thank us yet. We're just getting started." By the end of the week, we had a growing stack of evidence, copies of his requests, screenshots of emails he'd accidentally copied Sarah on years ago about redevelopment opportunities, bank records showing suspicious transfers. Piece by piece, the puzzle was forming. I realized something important as I watched them work. My brother thought I was weak because I was lying in a hospital bed. He thought strength was in signatures and quick deals. But strength, real strength, was in having people who refused to let you fight alone. And as Sarah and Elaine pieced together the case, I felt my own strength return. Not in my muscles or my stitched chest, but in the steadiness of my resolve. He had chosen the wrong time to strike. Because weakness fades, but truth? Truth only sharpens with time. The day of the hearing came faster than I expected. Hospitals have their own rhythm, nurses changing shifts, trays clattering, monitors beeping. But outside those walls, the world kept moving. And my brother was moving faster than anyone. Elaine told me he'd filed a petition, claimed I was no longer capable of managing my property due to medical incapacity. He wanted the court to grant him authority over my house, for my own protection. Protection. The word stung like salt on an open wound. The courthouse was small, just a red brick building near the river. I'd driven past it 100 times, but never thought I'd be walking through its heavy wooden doors to defend the life I'd built. Sarah was on one side of me, Elaine on the other. My chest tightened with every step, but I kept walking. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. We entered the courtroom, and there he was, my brother. Dressed in a sharp suit he probably rented, lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't look at me at first, but when he finally did, it wasn't the look of a brother. It was the look of a man convinced he was already victorious. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and tired eyes, called the room to order. My brother's lawyer jumped in immediately, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "Your Honor, my client only wishes to ensure his sister's well-being. She has recently undergone a major heart procedure, and there are concerns regarding her judgment. The property in question is deteriorating, the taxes behind schedule. It is in her best interest to allow my client to manage it responsibly," I wanted to shout. The taxes weren't behind. The property wasn't deteriorating. But I stayed quiet, my hands clenched in my lap. Then it was Elaine's turn. She stood slowly, calmly, and placed a stack of papers on the judge's bench. "With respect, Your Honor, my client is not incapacitated. She is recovering. What's deteriorating here is not her judgment. It's her brother's honesty." She flipped open the file. Here are records from the county clerk showing that the petitioner requested demolition permits for his sister's property weeks before her surgery. Here are financial statements showing suspicious withdrawals from his accounts during the same period. And here, she held up the deed my brother had tried to push in front of me at the hospital, is a quitclaim, deed with his name already filled in. No witness, no notary. He attempted to coerce my client into signing while she was still under medical care. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. She looked at the papers, then back at my brother. His lawyer cleared his throat, scrambling. "Your Honor, these are misunderstandings. Preliminary inquiries, nothing more. He was simply exploring options." Elaine cut him off, her voice like steel. "Exploring options for a property he does not own." For the first time, my brother's composure cracked. His jaw tightened, and he shot me a glare so sharp it almost pierced my skin. Then came my moment. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Thompson," she said gently, "do you wish to speak?" My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to stand. My voice wavered at first, then steadied. "Your Honor, I may be recovering from surgery, but I am not confused. I worked 30 years as a teacher. I raised 2 children alone. I paid every bill, every tax, every mortgage payment on that house myself. The only time it was ever in jeopardy was when my brother decided my weakness was his opportunity. That house isn't just walls, it's my life's work, and I will not sign it away." The silence that followed felt endless. Then the judge nodded once. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. Please sit." My knees shook as I lowered myself back into the chair. Sarah's hand slipped into mine, warm and steady. The judge shuffled the papers again, her face unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "This court sees no evidence that Mrs. Thompson is incapable of managing her property. On the contrary, the evidence suggests her brother has acted with questionable intent." Petition denied. The gavel hit wood with a sharp crack. Just like that, it was over. My brother stood frozen, color draining from his face. His lawyer whispered furiously, but he didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply breathed. Long, deep, steady, because this wasn't triumph. This was survival. As I stood to leave, my brother muttered under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear. "This isn't over." I looked him straight in the eye for the first time in weeks. "You're right," I said softly. "It isn't. But I'm not the one who should be afraid of what comes next." And then I walked out of that courtroom with Sarah and Elaine beside me, my chest aching but my head high. For the first time since the surgery, the air felt lighter. Not because the fight was finished, but because I knew, no matter what he tried next, I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The courthouse doors closed behind us, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the sun on my face without fear clinging to my chest. It wasn't victory I felt, at least not the kind people cheer about. It was something quieter, steadier, relief. Sarah looped her arm through mine as we walked toward the car. "You did it?" she said softly. I shook my head. "We did it." Because I knew the truth. If Sarah hadn't shown up with her steady courage, if Elaine hadn't torn through those papers with her sharp eye, I might still be lying in that hospital bed, whispering no into the void while my brother sharpened his claws. Back at my house, I stood on the porch for a long moment before stepping inside. The creaky swing still leaned slightly to the left. The oak tree still dropped its stubborn leaves across the walkway. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I walked through each room slowly, like I was seeing it for the first time. The kitchen with its scuffed linoleum. The living room where my kids once sprawled on the rug with crayons. The bedroom where stacks of graded papers had towered for years. Every corner whispered, "You fought for me, you kept me safe." And I whispered back, "No, you kept me safe." Because the house had been more than shelter. It had been my anchor, my promise to myself that no matter how hard life got, I could create something solid. That night, Sarah brought dinner. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken and mashed potatoes. We sat at the table like we had countless times before, laughing at nothing, letting the heaviness of the day dissolve into something softer. Elaine stopped by, too, not to talk about legal strategy, but just to check in. She even accepted a slice of pie, though she claimed she never ate sweets. For a few hours, the storm outside my life felt far away, but storms leave debris, and mine was no different. The days after the hearing were quiet, but not peaceful. My brother didn't call, didn't show up, didn't even send a text. His silence wasn't absence, it was threat. I knew him well enough to understand that he was regrouping, waiting for another angle. And that's when I realized something important. I couldn't keep living in defense. I couldn't just wait for the next attack, the next betrayal. I had to reclaim my story. So I did something small, something that felt almost silly at first. I planted flowers, bright marigolds along the walkway, roses near the porch. With every handful of soil, I felt like I was telling the world, this is still mine. This life, this home, this breath, it's still mine. Sarah laughed when she saw me out there, hat pulled low, dirt smudged on my cheek. You're supposed to be recovering, she scolded gently. I am, I told her, one flower at a time. At night, I sat with my journal, writing things I hadn't said out loud. The hurt, the anger, the disbelief, but also gratitude, the kind that swells in your chest when you realize people stood between you and the abyss, simply because they cared. One evening, my daughter came over. She'd sensed something was wrong, even if I hadn't told her everything. So I told her the truth, about the folder, the deed, the courtroom, about her uncle. Her eyes widened, then hardened. He did that to you, she whispered. I nodded, bracing for her heartbreak, but she reached across the table, squeezing my hand the way Sarah had. I'm sorry I wasn't here. But I'm here now, and he doesn't get another inch. Her words sank into me deeper than I expected. Because for so long, I'd thought I had to carry it all alone. I hadn't wanted to burden my kids, hadn't wanted to shatter their view of family. But maybe the truth wasn't a burden. Maybe it was a shield. The next day, I pulled out a fresh folder, not filled with forged deeds or threats, but with plans. Elaine helped me file paperwork to protect the house legally, layers of defense my brother couldn't touch. Sarah helped me draft a letter to the neighborhood association, explaining what had happened in case rumors started to swirl. My daughter offered to move back in for a while just to make sure I wasn't alone. Piece by piece, the walls around me grew higher. Not walls of fear, but of strength. One evening, I sat on the porch swing, watching the sun sink behind the oak tree. The air smelled faintly of marigolds. For the first time, I didn't feel like prey waiting for another attack. I felt like someone who had survived the storm and was planting again in the aftermath. Was I still angry? Yes. Was I still hurt? Absolutely. But hurt doesn't define you. What you do after the hurt, that's what shapes your life. And in that quiet moment, rocking gently, I realized something that made my chest ache in a different way. Peace isn't what you're given. Peace is what you choose. It had been 3 weeks since the hearing when I found myself standing in front of my fireplace, holding a letter I'd written years ago. The paper was yellowed, edges curled, words smudged where tears had fallen once upon a time. It was a letter I had started but never sent, to my brother. Back then, I had written about how proud I was that we'd both survived childhood, how I wished we could be closer, how I hoped he'd someday see me not just as his little sister, but as an equal. I'd written it the night after paying another mortgage bill, thinking maybe if he knew how hard I worked, he'd respect it. Now, as I read those words again, I realized something painful but freeing. I had spent too many years trying to earn the love of people who only saw me as useful. The fire crackled softly as I fed the letter to the flames. The paper curled, darkened, and finally dissolved into ash. I didn't cry, not this time, because I wasn't burning hope. I was burning illusion. The next morning, Sarah and I drove out past the edge of town to the cemetery where my parents were buried. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that makes you forget winter ever existed. We brought flowers, yellow sunflowers, because I wanted brightness, not sorrow. I stood there quietly, staring at the gravestones, my hands buried deep in my coat pockets. Sarah stood a few steps back, giving me space. I don't know what you'd think if you were here, I whispered. I don't know if you'd be ashamed of him or of me or of all of this. But I know one thing. I can't carry the weight of what-ifs anymore. I've got to put it down. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of fresh earth and grass. I set the flowers down gently, then stood taller. For years, I'd bent myself small to keep the peace, to hold on to family that never really held me back. But now I understood. Letting go isn't betrayal. Sometimes it's survival. Back at the house, the mailbox was full. Bills, coupons, a couple of cards. One caught my eye. The envelope was thick. The return address from a scholarship foundation I'd once donated to, back when I had a little extra money to spare. I opened it and read the neat, printed words. Thank you for supporting women rebuilding their lives. Your contribution helped 3 mothers return to school this year. I sat on the porch steps with that letter in my lap, the marigolds blooming beside me, and felt something shift. Maybe my story wasn't just about survival. Maybe it was about building something beyond myself. That afternoon, I pulled out my laptop, not to scroll through news about lawsuits or to check bank accounts obsessively, but to start something new. A small foundation. Nothing grand, nothing with marble plaques, just a fund to help women, single mothers, widows, women coming out of hardship, hold on to their homes when the world tried to take them. I named it the Porch Light Fund, because every woman deserves a place where the porch light stays on for her, no matter how dark the night. When I told Sarah, her eyes welled with tears. Karen, that's beautiful. It's more than beautiful, I said softly. It's necessary. Weeks turned into months. My health improved slowly. The scar on my chest faded into a thin pink line, a reminder not of weakness, but of survival. My daughter visited often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just with laughter. The house filled again, not with fear, but with life. And as for my brother, he disappeared from my daily world. Rumors swirled that he'd tried another business deal that collapsed. I didn't chase the details. I didn't need to, because he no longer held the pen to my story. I did. One evening, sitting on that creaky porch swing, Sarah beside me, I let myself finally breathe out the lesson I had carried through this storm. Family isn't always blood, I said quietly. Family is who shows up, who stands beside you when you're broken, who refuses to let you be erased. Sarah smiled, her hand finding mine. And you, Karen, you're family to a lot more people than you realize. The oak tree rustled above us, the porch light flickered on, and for the first time in years, I felt peace that wasn't fragile. Peace that was mine. I don't tell this story for revenge. I tell it because betrayal doesn't have to be the last word. Because even when the people closest to you try to take everything, you can choose to hold on, to fight, to rebuild. I tell it so someone out there, maybe sitting in their own quiet house, maybe feeling like they're losing everything, knows they're not alone. Because if I've learned anything, it's this: strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to keep the light on, to keep planting flowers, to keep choosing yourself, no matter who tries to take you down. And that's what I choose now, every single day. So that's my story. I learned the hardest lesson, that sometimes betrayal comes from the people we trust most. But I also learned that strength can return when we least expect it. And that real family is the one who stands beside us, not the one who tries to take from us. If you've been through something like this, I hope my journey reminds you that you are not alone and that you deserve peace. Thank you for watching. If this spoke to your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And remember, your love, your truth, your place are worth defending.